They buried the boy at dawn 3 months after the man who killed him should have hanged. 3 months ago, Garrett Sullivan had found Neshoba's body near Willow Creek, the water running red around the rocks. 3 months of accusations whispered in the streets of Mescal. 3 months of waiting for justice that never came. And today they laid the boy to rest, while his killer still walked free. The sun rose pale and cold over Mescal Valley that morning, casting long shadows across the neutral ground where two worlds met but never mixed. The earth here was neither Apache land nor white man's territory. It was the space between where the dead were laid to rest when peace hung by threads too fragile to name. Garrett stood at the edge of the gathering, his hand resting on the worn grip of his Colt revolver. Not in threat, in preparation. Around him the desert stretched endless and indifferent, dotted with sage and creosote that smelled of dust and old promises. The wind moved through the valley like a whisper carrying too many secrets. 50 yards away, they lowered the boy into the ground. Neshoba, 19 years old, Apache warrior, brother, son, dead for 3 months, buried today. Apache tradition required careful preparation of the dead rituals that could not be rushed even when justice demanded speed. For 3 months, Neshoba's body had been tended by the women of the tribe, prepared according to customs older than any white man's law. And only when every prayer had been spoken, every ceremony completed, could they finally lay him to rest. The mourners formed a circle around the grave, their faces carved from stone and grief. Apache men and women, dressed in traditional clothing, their bodies still as statues, their eyes fixed on the hole in the earth that would swallow one of their own. The women keened softly, a sound that rose and fell like breathing. The men stood silent, their mouths pressed into hard lines that spoke of restraint barely held. Garrett did not move closer. He could not. Between him and the funeral stood an invisible wall built from suspicion, hatred, and 90 days of accusations that followed him like shadows. Every person in that circle believed the same thing. Every person in the town behind him believed it too. Garrett Sullivan killed that boy. He shifted his weight, feeling the ache in his lower back from too many years breaking horses and mending fences. At 41, he was still strong, still capable, but the years had begun to leave their marks. Gray touched his temples now. Lines creased the corners of his eyes from squinting into too many sunrises. His hands bore scars from barbed wire rope burn and the 100 small violences of ranch life. But his hands were steady. They had to be. 3 months ago, he had been hunting on his northern property line, tracking a coyote that had been taking his chickens. He had fired his rifle once, missing the animal as it darted into the brush. Minutes later, he had heard another gunshot. Closer, sharper, coming from the direction of Willow Creek. He had found Neshoba in the shallows, the water pink with blood, his rifle lying nearby. The boy's eyes had been open, staring at nothing. And Garrett's own rifle had still been warm in his hands. One round fired the brass casing somewhere in the dirt behind him. Coincidence looked like guilt when you were the only white man near a dead Apache. Sheriff Tom Vance had come to his ranch that afternoon and asked questions Garrett could not answer. Not fully, not honestly, not yet. The ceremony continued. An elder spoke words in Apache that Garrett did not understand but felt in his chest. The language rolled and broke like water over stones, ancient and patient. A woman stepped forward, placing something wrapped in cloth beside the body. Others followed. Offerings, memories, pieces of a life cut short. Garrett's eyes moved across the mourners' cataloging faces. Some he knew, most he recognized only in passing. Traders, scouts, families who had lived on the edges of the valley long before his time, long before any white man's claim to this desert could be written in ink and filed in some distant courthouse. Then his gaze found her, Anaba. She stood at the head of the grave, her posture rigid, her face betraying nothing. 28 years old, tall and lean, with black hair that fell straight down her back in a single thick braid. She wore a doeskin dress decorated with turquoise beads and around her shoulders hung a shawl the color of dried blood. Her hands were clasped in front of her fingers, interlaced, knuckles white. She had not looked at Garrett once since the ceremony began. Beside her stood another young woman younger than Annaba, her face streaked with tears she did not bother to hide. Imala, the youngest daughter who had loved her brother with the open affection that Annaba kept locked behind iron discipline. While Annaba stood rigid, Imala wept. While Annaba's face showed nothing, Imala's showed everything. She was perhaps 25, dressed in similar fashion to her sister, but with wild flowers woven into her hair. A tradition for mourning the young Garrett had heard. Flowers for a life that had barely begun to bloom. Beside both daughters stood Kuruk, their father, the leader of the band that called this territory home. He was older, his face weathered and lined like canyon walls, his hair streaked with gray. His eyes were black and hard as obsidian, and when they turned toward Garrett, they carried the weight of judgment already past. Kuruk believed his son's killer stood less than 100 feet away, and he was waiting for justice. Garrett felt the pressure of those eyes but did not look away. To look away would be to admit guilt he did not carry. To look away would be to surrender the only thing he had left, the truth, even if he could not yet speak it. The elder finished his words. The women's keening grew louder, then quieter, then stopped altogether. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. Men began shoveling earth back into the grave, the dirt hitting the body with soft final thuds. Each scoop of earth was a door closing. Each moment was a countdown. Garrett's throat tightened. He had seen death before, too much of it, war, disease, accidents that came too fast to prevent. But this death was different. This death had teeth, and it was biting down on everything he had left. Behind him, he heard the creak of wagon wheels. Townspeople. They had come too, though they kept their distance from the Apache mourners, shopkeepers, ranchers, families who lived within the wooden walls of Mescal Town and pretended the world beyond did not exist until it forced its way in. Among them was Nora Hadley. Garrett caught her eye across the distance. She stood beside her small wagon, her hands folded, her expression somber. 32 years old, a widow, the owner of the general store that served both town and tribe with equal fairness. She was one of the few who had spoken to him since the accusations began. One of the few who said she did not believe he was a killer. But Garrett was beginning to wonder if her belief was a gift or a burden. Nora gave him a small nod. Nothing more. Then she turned her attention back to the grave, her lips moving in silent prayer, or perhaps just words she needed to say to someone who could no longer hear. The grave was covered now. The earth mounded over Neshoba's body raw and fresh. The mourners began to disperse, slowly moving away in small groups. Conversations were low and clipped. Glances were cast toward Garrett, some full of anger, some of curiosity, all of suspicion. He stood his ground. Then the crowd parted, and Annaba began walking toward him. Every head turned. Every voice fell silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. She moved with purpose, her steps even and measured. She kept her features neutral, but her eyes locked onto Garrett's with an intensity that burned. She was not running. She was not hesitant. She crossed the distance between the grave and the edge of the gathering with the certainty of someone who had already decided what needed to happen next. Garrett set his jaw, then forced himself to relax. He would not draw on a mourning woman. He would not draw on a sister burying her brother. Whatever came next, he would meet it, standing still. Annaba stopped 3 feet in front of him, close enough to see the faint lines of sleeplessness beneath her eyes, close enough to see the tremble in her jaw she fought to control, close enough to see the grief she would not let escape. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Two people separated by culture, by language, by a chasm of misunderstanding and rage. Two people bound by the same dead boy and the same unanswered question. Who pulled the trigger Annaba raised her hand. Garrett saw it coming but did not move. The slap cracked across his face like a gunshot. His head snapped to the side, pain blooming hot across his cheek. The sound echoed across the valley, sharp and final. Gasps rose from the crowd. Hands moved toward weapons. Sheriff Vance stepped forward from the townspeople, his hand raised in a gesture of calm that no one was ready to accept. Garrett straightened slowly, his face stinging, his vision blurred for a heartbeat. Then he looked back at Annaba. Her hand was still raised, trembling now, her chest rising and falling with breaths that came too fast. And then she leaned in, close enough that only he could hear, close enough that her words were for him alone. "Midnight," she whispered, her voice low and rough as gravel. "The old mission, come alone or I will make sure they find you guilty." Then she turned and walked away. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Some shouted. Kuruk moved toward his daughter, his expression dark with confusion, or perhaps approval. Imala followed, placing a hand on Annaba's arm, but Annaba shook her off gently. Sheriff Vance called Garrett's name, but Garrett did not respond. He stood rooted to the spot, his hand rising slowly to touch his burning cheek, his mind racing through the implications of what she had just said. Not a threat of violence, a demand for truth, and he had no choice but to answer. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Garrett returned to his ranch, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of survival. The house was small, 2 rooms and a porch that sagged on one end. The barn needed repairs he could not afford. The fences stretched across land that fed 30 head of cattle, most of them thin from a summer that had given too little rain. He did not eat. He could not focus. The hours crawled toward midnight with the patience of a predator stalking wounded prey. When the sun finally set, painting the sky in shades of red and purple, Garrett saddled his horse. A bay gelding 12 years old, steady and unbothered by the tension radiating from his rider. He checked his rifle, his revolver, his ammunition. Not because he planned to use them, because a man did not ride into the unknown unarmed. The old mission sat 5 miles south of town, halfway between the valley floor and the foothills. It had been built generations ago by Spanish missionaries who thought they could convert the desert and its people with words and stone. They had failed. The mission had crumbled slowly over decades, its walls eaten by wind and time, its roof long gone, its purpose forgotten. Now it was a ruin, a skeleton, a place where ghosts gathered, if you believed in such things. Garrett did not believe in ghosts, but he believed in consequences. He arrived just before midnight, the moon hanging low and full above the jagged remains of the mission walls. The structure rose from the desert floor like broken teeth adobe, crumbling into dust wooden beams, jutting at odd angles. Shadows pooled thick in the corners, and the wind moved through the empty doorways with a sound like distant voices. Garrett dismounted and tied his horse to a piece of rebar protruding from the ground. He walked forward slowly, his boots crunching on gravel and fragments of clay tile. His hand stayed near his gun, his eyes scanning the darkness. "You came." The voice came from inside the mission. Not Annaba's. Deeper, older, male. Garrett stopped at the threshold. His pulse quickened, but his breathing stayed even. He had walked into worse traps than this. If they wanted him dead, they would have killed him already. "I came alone," Garrett said, like she asked. "Step inside." Garrett hesitated only a moment, then moved forward into the ruined nave of the mission. Moonlight spilled through gaps in the walls, illuminating the space in pale silver. At the far end, where an altar might have stood, 2 figures waited. Annaba stood to the left, no emotion crossing her face, her hands at her sides. She had changed from her funeral dress into riding clothes, practical leather and cotton, her braid tied back with a strip of red cloth. And beside her stood Kuruk. Garrett's hand moved toward his gun. "Don't," Kuruk said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "If I wanted you dead, you would not have made it past the first wall." Garrett stopped. He studied the older man, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the set of his shoulders that spoke of grief carried with discipline. This was not a man driven by rage. This was a father trying to hold himself together while the world demanded he break. "Why am I here?" Garrett asked. Karuk stepped forward, his boots silent on the dusty floor. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear, each word chosen with care. "Because my son is dead, and you are the man everyone believes killed him. I didn't. I know." The words hung in the air like smoke. Garrett blinked, uncertain he had heard correctly. Annabelle remained still, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or relief. "You know," Garrett repeated. Karuk nodded slowly. "Nashoba was my son. I taught him to hunt, to track, to survive. He was young, yes, reckless sometimes, but he was not foolish enough to let a rancher twice his age shoot him from ambush." Garrett felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but space, room to breathe. "Then why does everyone think I did it?" "Because someone wants them to think that," Annabelle said, speaking for the first time since the gravesite. Her voice was steadier now, colder. "And because you were found with his body, with your rifle, with no explanation that makes sense." Garrett met her gaze. "I told the sheriff what I knew." "You told him you were hunting a coyote," she shot back. "You told him you fired your rifle that morning. You told him you heard another shot and found my brother dead. But you were the only one there. Your gun had been fired. And you expect us to believe you're innocent." "I don't expect anything," Garrett said quietly, "but I am innocent, of murder at least." Karuk raised a hand, silencing his daughter before she could respond. "We are not here to accuse you, rancher. We are here to offer you a choice." His face hardened. "What kind of choice?" Karuk glanced at Annabelle, then back at Garrett. "The people of my tribe want justice. The people of your town want to see you hanged. The sheriff cannot hold back either side much longer. In 3 days, maybe less, someone will take the law into their own hands. And when that happens, blood will spill. Not just yours, many will die." "I can leave," Garrett said. "Ride north, disappear." "And prove your guilt," Annabelle said sharply, "and leave whoever really killed my brother free to do it again." Garrett studied her, seeing past the anger now to the pain beneath. She was not here for revenge. She was here for answers, just like him. "So what do you want from me?" he asked. Karuk took a breath, his shoulders rising and falling. "I want you to marry my daughter." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward, disturbing everything. Garrett stared at the older man, then at Annabelle, then back again. "What?" For 3 months, Karuk continued his tone matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing livestock or trade goods. "You will marry Annabelle in the eyes of your law. She will live on your ranch. She will watch you, study you, search for any sign that you are lying. And if she finds proof I killed him, then she will kill you herself," Karuk said simply. "Not the tribe, not a mob, her. It is her right as his sister." Garrett's mouth went dry. He looked at Annabelle, who nodded once, confirming her father's words. "And if she doesn't find proof?" Garrett asked. "Then in 3 months you will help us find who did kill him," Karuk said. "Together, because if you are innocent rancher, then someone went to great trouble to make you look guilty, and that someone is still out there." Garrett processed this slowly, turning it over in his mind. It was insane, dangerous. A marriage built on suspicion and surveillance. But it was also the only option that kept him alive long enough to clear his name. "What happens after 3 months?" he asked. "If we find the real killer, you are free," Karuk said. "You divorce. You go your separate ways. My tribe will have justice. Your town will have peace. And if we don't find the killer," Karuk's expression went cold, "then you will be given to the tribe for justice, Apache justice, and Annabelle will be the one to carry it out." Silence fell over the ruined mission. The wind moved through the gaps in the walls, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled the sound lonely and sharp. Garrett looked at Annabelle, really looked at her. She was not crying. She was not begging. She was standing in front of him with the weight of her brother's death on her shoulders, offering him a chance he did not deserve, and she had no reason to give. Why, he asked her, why offer this? For the first time her mask cracked, just slightly, just enough to show the exhaustion beneath. Because I need to know the truth, she said quietly, and I will not get it if you are dead. Garrett nodded slowly. He understood that. He understood needing answers more than revenge. All right, he said, I accept. Kuruk exhaled a sound that might have been relief or resignation. Then it is done. Tomorrow you will go to the sheriff. You will sign the papers. And my daughter will come to your ranch. Annaba stepped forward, closing the distance between them until she stood only a foot away. This close, Garrett could see the faint scar above her left eyebrow, the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, the tension in her jaw that spoke of control, held by sheer will. I am not doing this for you, she said, her voice low and fierce. I am doing this for Neshoba, and if I find even one shred of proof that you pulled that trigger, I will not wait 3 months. I will end you the moment I know. Garrett held her gaze. Understood. She nodded once, then turned and walked out of the mission without another word. Kuruk lingered a moment longer, his eyes searching Garrett's face for something. Truth, perhaps, or weakness. You are either very brave or very foolish, rancher, Kuruk said quietly. Probably both, Garrett replied. Kuruk almost smiled. Almost. Then he too walked away, leaving Garrett alone in the ruins with nothing but moonlight and the echoes of a bargain that might save him or destroy him. Garrett stood there for a long time after they left, staring at the broken altar, the crumbling walls, the darkness that pressed in from all sides. Then he walked back to his horse mounted and rode home through the desert night. And with every step, one thought circled through his mind. He had 3 months to find a killer, and the clock had already started. The next morning, Garrett rode into town just after sunrise. Mescal was small, a collection of wood and adobe buildings clustered around a single main street. General store, saloon, sheriff's office, blacksmith. A church that saw more dust than congregation. The kind of place that existed because people needed somewhere to exist, not because anyone particularly wanted to be there. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside. The building smelled of coffee and old paper, the walls lined with wanted posters and notices that curled at the edges. A single desk sat in the center of the room, covered in ledgers and correspondence. Behind it sat Sheriff Tom Vance. Vance looked up when Garrett entered, his expression weary. He was a man in his late 40s, his hair graying at the temples, his face lined from too many years, trying to keep peace in a place that did not want it. He wore a tin star pinned to his vest, a Colt on his hip, and the permanent look of someone who had stopped being surprised by human stupidity decades ago. Garrett, Vance said, setting down his pen, didn't expect to see you this morning. Need to file some paperwork, Garrett said. Vance raised an eyebrow. What kind of paperwork? Marriage license. The sheriff's other eyebrow joined the first. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. You're getting married. Yes. To who? Annaba, Kuruk's daughter. For a long moment, Vance said nothing. He just stared at Garrett as if waiting for the punchline to a joke that wasn't funny. When Garrett didn't elaborate, Vance let out a long breath and rubbed his eyes. You've lost your mind, Vance said flatly. Probably. She's the sister of the boy you're accused of killing. I know. Half the town thinks you should hang. The other half thinks you should be handed over to the tribe for worse. I know that too. Vance stood up, crossing his arms over his chest. So explain to me why the hell you want to marry into the family of a dead man everyone thinks you murdered. Garrett met his gaze steadily. Because it's the only way to prove I didn't. Vance studied him for a long time, his jaw working as if chewing over arguments he wanted to make, but knew wouldn't change anything. Finally, he sighed and pulled open a drawer, retrieving a single sheet of paper. This is a terrible idea, Vance said, placing the form on the desk. Noted. But I can't stop you. No, you can't. Vance picked up his pen, dipped it in ink, and began filling out the form. When's the ceremony? Soon as the paperwork's filed. Witnesses, you and whoever else you can find. Vance shook his head but kept writing. When he finished, he slid the paper across the desk. Sign here and here, Garrett signed. His handwriting was rough but legible, the ink drying slowly in the morning heat. When he finished, Vance countersigned and stamped the document with an official seal that looked more impressive than it had any right to be. There, Vance said, legally binding. Congratulations. You're about to marry a woman who probably wants you dead. Thanks for the warm wishes. Vance's expression softened slightly. Garrett, seriously, what are you doing? Garrett picked up the form, folding it carefully. What I have to. Before Vance could respond, the door opened, and Nora Hadley stepped inside. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her face slightly flushed from the morning heat. When she saw Garrett, she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Morning, Sheriff. Garrett, she said, nodding to each of them. Nora, Vance replied. What brings you by? Just wanted to check in, she said. See if there's been any progress on the Neshoba investigation. Vance shook his head. Nothing new? Still looking into it. Nora's gaze shifted to Garrett, lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. I heard what happened at the funeral yesterday. That must have been difficult. It was what it was, Garrett said carefully. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me, Nora said. Store's always open. Appreciate it. She smiled again, that same almost smile, then turned and left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Vance watched her go, then looked back at Garrett. She's got a soft spot for you. She's a kind woman. Too kind, maybe. Garrett frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Vance shrugged. Nothing. Just an observation. Not many folks in this town willing to stand by someone accused of murder. Makes you wonder why. The words sat heavy in the air. Garrett studied the sheriff's face, looking for accusation, but found only caution. Vance wasn't saying Nora was guilty of anything. He was just saying she was different. And in a place like this, different meant suspicious. Garrett folded the marriage license and tucked it into his shirt pocket. I'll bring Annaba by this afternoon. We'll make it official. I'll be here, Vance said. God help us all. Garrett left the office and stepped back into the sunlight. The street was beginning to stir with morning activity. Shopkeepers opening shutters, horses being led to water, the everyday rhythms of a town that wanted to pretend yesterday's funeral hadn't happened. He mounted his horse and turned toward home, but as he rode his mind kept circling back to Nora, to the way she had looked at him, to Vance's words. Not many folks willing to stand by someone accused of murder. And then he remembered something else, something that had been nagging at the edges of his thoughts since he found Neshoba's body 3 months ago. The tracks. There had been boot prints near the creek, his own, yes, but also others, smaller, lighter, the stride pattern wrong for a man, a woman's tracks. And when he had returned to the scene the next day with the sheriff, those tracks had been gone, swept away, covered, erased. Garrett's hands tightened on the reins. He had thought it was wind, or rain, or animals disturbing the ground. But now, riding through the morning light with Nora's smile still fresh in his mind, he began to wonder. And wondering turned to suspicion. And suspicion turned to a cold, hard knot in his gut that wouldn't let go. He didn't kill Neshoba, but he was beginning to think he knew who did, and the thought made his blood run cold. The ceremony took place in Sheriff Vance's office 3 hours after noon, exactly 3 months and 4 days after Neshoba's death. Garrett had counted every one of those days. 94 mornings waking to suspicion. 94 evenings wondering if a mob would come. And now on day 95 he was marrying the sister of the boy he was accused of killing. There were no flowers, no music, no gathering of well-wishers throwing rice or offering blessings. Just 4 people standing in a cramped room that smelled of tobacco and old leather, pretending this was something other than what it was. A transaction, a trap. A calculated risk wrapped in the language of matrimony. Garrett stood with his hat in his hands, his boots freshly cleaned, but still carrying dust in the creases. He wore the same clothes he had worn to the funeral, the same clothes he wore most days. A man did not own much in the way of ceremony when his life was built on survival. Across from him stood Anaba. She had changed into a simple cotton dress, dark blue, unadorned, except for a silver pendant at her throat, shaped like a crescent moon. Her hair was braided, as always, tied with red thread that matched the color of dried blood. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her posture rigid. She kept her features neutral. She did not look at Garrett. She looked at the wall behind him, at some point in the distance that existed only in her mind. Sheriff Vance stood between them, a worn Bible in his hands. He had retrieved it from a drawer where it lived between weddings and funerals, its pages yellowed and marked with annotations, in a hand that was not his own. Probably his predecessor's, or the man before that. The book had seen more oaths than either of them could count. The fourth person in the room was Nora Hadley. She had appeared just as they were about to begin offering herself as witness, with a smile that seemed both kind and somehow too eager. Garrett had wanted to refuse, but Vance needed a second witness, and there was no one else in town who would stand in this room without making their disapproval known. So, Nora stood in the corner, her hands folded, her eyes moving between Garrett and Anaba, with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been something else entirely. Vance cleared his throat. "We're here to join these two in matrimony, not because they asked for it with joy, but because the law requires ceremony when two people decide to bind their lives together. So," he paused, looking at Garrett, then at Anaba, "do either of you have any objections to this union before we proceed?" Anaba's lips pressed together briefly. "No." "Garrett, no." Vance nodded slowly. "Then, by the power vested in me, by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. Sign here." He placed the Bible on the desk and opened it to a page where a marriage certificate had been tucked inside. The form was simple: names, date, witnesses, a line for each signature. Garrett signed first. His hand was steady, his writing clear despite the tension coiling in his shoulders. When he finished, he stepped back and handed the pen to Anaba. She took it without meeting his eyes. Her signature was smaller than his, precise, each letter formed with care. When she finished, she set the pen down and stepped away as if the desk had burned her. Nora signed next as witness, her handwriting looping and decorative. Then Vance added his name and stamped the document with the same seal he had used on the license that morning. "There," Vance said quietly. "It's done." For a moment no one moved. The weight of what had just happened settled over the room like dust after an explosion. This was not a marriage born of love or even practical partnership. This was a leash, a cage built from suspicion and necessity, and all four people in that room knew it. Anaba turned toward the door. "I will return to my father's camp. I need to gather my things." "I'll come with you," Garrett said. She stopped, turning to face him for the first time since the ceremony began. "No, you will go to your ranch and prepare a place for me to sleep. Separate from you. I will arrive before sunset." It was not a request. It was a command. Garrett nodded. "Understood." Anaba left without another word. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the small office. Vance let out a long breath and sank into his chair. Well, that was about as warm as a January creek. Nora stepped forward, her expression concerned. "Garrett, are you sure about this?" "Too late to ask that now," Garrett replied. "But 3 months living with someone who thinks you're a murderer, that's not a marriage. That's torture." "Maybe," Garrett said. "But it's the only way to prove I'm not." Nora reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was light, almost tentative. "If you need anything at all, you know where to find me." Garrett looked down at her hand, then at her face. She was watching him with an intensity that felt out of proportion to the moment. Her eyes searched his as if trying to read something written beneath his skin. "I appreciate that," Garrett said carefully, stepping back just enough that her hand fell away. Nora's smile flickered, then returned. "Of course. I just want you to know you have friends in this town. Not everyone believes the worst of you. Good to know." She lingered a moment longer, then nodded to Vance and left. The door closed again, leaving Garrett and the sheriff alone. Vance leaned back in his chair, studying Garrett with an expression that was hard to read. "She's awfully concerned about you. She's a kind woman." "She's something," Vance said. "Question is what?" Garrett frowned. "You think she's involved?" "I think everyone's involved until proven otherwise," Vance replied. "That's how you stay alive in this job, and that's how you should approach the next 3 months. Trust no one." "Exactly." Garrett picked up his hat and settled it on his head. "Thanks for the advice, and for doing this." "Don't thank me yet," Vance said. "If this goes sideways, I'm the one who'll be writing the report about why I let a murder suspect marry into the victim's family. Then let's make sure it doesn't go sideways." Garrett left the office and stepped into the afternoon heat. The sun hung high and merciless, baking the street into hardpan. A few townspeople moved along the boardwalks, their conversations stopping as they noticed him. Word would spread fast. By nightfall, everyone in Mescal would know about the wedding, and by tomorrow the speculation would be thick enough to cut with a knife. He mounted his horse and rode toward home, his mind already working through the logistics of what came next. Annaba would need a space, somewhere she could sleep, keep her belongings, maintain the illusion of a marriage while actually conducting an investigation. The house only had 2 rooms, the main room that served as kitchen, dining, and living space, and his bedroom, which meant she would take his bedroom and he would sleep on the floor of the main room. Fine. He had slept in worse places. The ranch appeared in the distance, its buildings low and weathered against the horizon. Garrett felt a strange tightness in his chest as he approached. This place had been his for 8 years. 8 years of solitude broken only by the rhythms of work and the occasional visit from neighbors who needed help or supplies. It had been his refuge, his fortress, and now someone else was going to live here. Watch him, judge him, search for evidence of guilt in every action, every word, every moment of silence. He dismounted and began preparing. He stripped his bed, replacing the sheets with clean ones from the chest at the foot of the frame. He moved his personal items out of the bedroom and into a corner of the main room. Clothes, a few books, a photograph of his parents long dead, their faces stern and unfamiliar now after so many years. And one other thing, a small wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard under his bed. Garrett knelt and pried up the board, revealing the space beneath. Inside lay the box plain and unmarked. He hesitated, then lifted it out and opened it. Inside was a gun, not his Colt, a smaller pistol, a Derringer with a pearl handle delicate and deadly, and beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a piece of fabric, torn, stained dark with something that might have been mud or might have been blood. Garrett stared at it for a long moment, his mouth pressing into a hard line. Then he closed the box, replaced it in the hiding spot, and put the floorboard back in place. He would tell Annaba about it, eventually, when the time was right, when he was sure she wouldn't kill him the moment he revealed what he had been hiding. The sun was beginning its descent when he heard hoofbeats approaching. Garrett stepped onto the porch and watched as Annaba rode toward the ranch, leading a pack-horse loaded with supplies. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot, her posture straight, her hands light on the reins. She stopped in front of the house and dismounted. For a moment they looked at each other across the distance, 2 strangers bound by law and desperation. "The bedroom is yours," Garrett said. "I'll sleep out here." Annaba nodded. "Good." She began unloading her belongings. A bedroll, saddlebags, a rifle in a leather scabbard, bundles wrapped in cloth that might have been food or clothing or both. Garrett moved to help, but she held up a hand. "I can manage. Suit yourself." He watched as she carried everything inside, making multiple trips, her movements efficient and deliberate. She did not ask where things should go. She simply chose spaces and claimed them. The rifle went beside the bedroom door, the saddlebags at the foot of the bed, the bundles on the small table near the window. When she finished, she stood in the center of the main room and looked around. Her gaze moved over every surface, every corner, cataloging and assessing. She was memorizing the space, learning its rhythms, preparing to notice when something changed. "There's food in the pantry," Garrett said. "Help yourself to whatever you need." "I brought my own." "Then we'll keep them separate." She met his eyes. "That would be wise." The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Garrett searched for something to say, some way to break the tension, but everything that came to mind felt wrong. Small talk seemed absurd. Apologies felt hollow. Explanations would only make things worse, so he said nothing. Annabelle turned toward the bedroom. "I will wake before dawn. I expect you to do the same." "Always do." She paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame. "And Garrett." "Yes?" "I meant what I said at the mission. If I find proof you killed my brother, I will not wait for the 3 months to end." "I know." She disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door. A moment later he heard the scrape of wood against wood as she wedged a chair under the handle. Locking him out. Protecting herself. Garrett stood alone in the main room, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of the bargain he had made, settling onto his shoulders like a yoke. 3 months, 90 days, and every single one of them would be a test. He unrolled his bedding on the floor near the cold fireplace and lay down, staring at the ceiling beams. Sleep would not come easy tonight, probably not for many nights to come, but he had work to do, evidence to find, a killer to unmask, and the clock was ticking. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both mundane and surreal. Garrett woke before dawn as he always did and began his chores, feeding livestock, checking fences, hauling water from the well, the tasks that made up the skeleton of ranch life. Annabelle woke when he did. She did not help with his work, nor did he ask her to. Instead, she watched, from the porch, from the barn, from the small rise behind the house where she could see the entire property laid out below. She was cataloging his movements, his habits, the patterns of his days. And he let her, because he had nothing to hide, at least not in his daily routine. On the 3rd day, Nora Hadley arrived. Garrett was repairing a section of fence when he heard the wagon approaching. He looked up to see Nora's familiar rig rolling toward the house, pulled by a single gray mare. Nora sat on the bench seat, her face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, a basket covered with cloth resting beside her. He set down his tools and walked toward the house, arriving just as Nora pulled the wagon to a stop. "Morning, Garrett," she called, her voice bright. "Thought I'd bring some supplies for you and your new bride." Annabelle emerged from the house, her face unreadable, standing on the porch, arms crossed, watching as Nora climbed down from the wagon and retrieved the basket. "Mrs. Sullivan," Nora said, offering a smile. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You are," Annabelle replied flatly. Nora's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Well, I won't stay long. Just wanted to drop off some fresh bread and preserves. Help you settle in." She held out the basket. Annabelle did not move to take it. Garrett stepped forward. "That's kind of you, Nora. We appreciate it." He took the basket, feeling the weight of bread and jars inside. Nora's smile returned, but it was directed at him now, not at Annabelle. "How are you managing?" Nora asked. "Must be quite an adjustment having company after so many years alone." "We're managing fine." "Good. That's good." Nora's gaze shifted to Annabelle, lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "If you need anything, Mrs. Sullivan, anything at all, my store is always open. We serve everyone in this valley, Apache and white alike." "I know who you serve," Annabelle said quietly. "I have shopped there before." "Of course. I just wanted to make sure you felt welcome." "I don't." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nora blinked, her smile frozen, her hands clasping and unclasping at her sides. Garrett cleared his throat. "Nora, I think we're all still adjusting, but we appreciate the gesture." Nora nodded quickly, stepping back toward her wagon. "Yes, of course, I understand. I'll leave you to it." She climbed onto the wagon and took up the reins, but before she drove away, she looked back at Garrett, her expression shifting into something harder to read: concern, or perhaps disappointment. "Be careful, Garrett," she said softly. "Not everyone in this valley wants peace." Then she snapped the reins and the wagon rolled away, leaving dust in its wake. What Garrett did not see was Wade Preston waiting for Nora on the road back to town, his horse blocking her path. Did not hear Wade's quiet threats about fire and ruin if she didn't cooperate. Did not know that Nora's smile was already beginning to crack under the weight of secrets she could not carry alone. Garrett watched her go, then turned to find Annaba staring at him. "She wants something from you," Annaba said. "She's just being neighborly." "No, she wants something. I saw it in her eyes." Garrett set the basket on the porch railing. "You see enemies everywhere." "Because they are everywhere," Annaba replied. "And if you cannot see that, you are more foolish than I thought." She went back inside, leaving Garrett alone with the basket and the echo of Nora's words. "Be careful." He was beginning to think that was the only good advice anyone had given him. That night, after the sun had set and the desert cooled, Garrett slipped out of the house. He waited until he heard Annaba's breathing slow and steady behind the closed bedroom door, then gathered a lantern and a shovel and walked toward Willow Creek. The moon was a sliver offering little light, but Garrett knew the path by heart. He had walked it 100 times, 1,000. The creek was 2 miles from the ranch, a thin ribbon of water that ran year-round, even when the rest of the valley dried to bone. It was also where Neshoba had died. Garrett approached the site slowly, his lantern held low, his eyes scanning the ground. The sheriff and his deputies had searched this area thoroughly in the days after the shooting. They had found shell casings, boot prints, blood, but they had not found everything, because Garrett had made sure of it. He knelt near a cluster of rocks where the water pooled the current slow and lazy. He set the lantern down and began to dig the shovel, biting into the soft earth. 6 inches down, his blade struck something that was not rock. He set the shovel aside and used his hands, scooping away dirt until he revealed a piece of fabric, wrapped around something small and hard. Garrett lifted it carefully, brushing away the soil. The fabric was fine, delicate, a handkerchief embroidered with small flowers along the edges, and in one corner, stitched in careful script, were 2 initials: N.H. Nora Hadley. Garrett's hands tightened around the cloth. Beneath it was something else. A button. Brass. The kind used on women's riding jackets. He had found these the day after Neshoba's death, hidden in the brush near the creek as if dropped in haste. He had taken them and buried them, intending to come back when he had more time to think, more time to understand what they meant. Now, holding them in his hands, he understood perfectly. Nora had been here on the day Neshoba died. The question was why. "What did you find?" Garrett spun his hand, moving toward his gun, but it was only Annaba. She stood 10 feet away, her rifle in her hands, her expression impossible to read in the dim light. "How long have you been following me?" Garrett asked. "Since you left the house," Annaba replied. "You're not as quiet as you think." She stepped closer, her eyes moving to the items in his hands. "What is that?" Garrett hesitated. This was the moment he either trusted her with the truth or lost her forever. He held out the handkerchief and the button. Annaba took them, turning them over in the lantern light. She showed no immediate reaction, but he saw her jaw work slightly. She recognized the initials. She understood what they meant. "Nora Hadley," she said quietly. "Yes. These were here when my brother died. I found them the next day. I buried them because I didn't know what they meant. I still don't." Annaba looked up at him, her eyes hard. "This is too easy. You could have planted these, made them appear now to deflect suspicion." "I could have," Garrett admitted. But I didn't. How do I know that? You don't. They stared at each other across the small distance, the lantern flickering between them. The sound of the creek filled the silence water, moving over stones indifferent to human drama. Why would she kill him? Annaba asked finally. I don't know, but she was here, and someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look like I did it. Annaba studied the handkerchief, her fingers tracing the embroidered flowers. I have shopped at her store many times. She was always kind, always fair. People can be both kind and dangerous. Yes, they can. Annaba folded the handkerchief carefully and slipped it into her pocket. We will watch her, see if she makes a mistake. And if she doesn't, then we will make her think she has. Garrett nodded slowly. This was the first time Annaba had said we instead of I. It was a small word, but it carried weight. They were no longer entirely adversaries. They were something else now, partners perhaps, or at least temporary allies bound by the same need for truth. Annaba turned to walk back toward the ranch, then stopped. Garrett. Yes. If you are lying to me, if you planted those items, I will know, eventually, and when I do, I will not forgive you. I know. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Garrett alone with the lantern and the creek, and the growing certainty that the next 3 months were going to be far more complicated than he had imagined. 4 days later, the town held a meeting. It was announced by a notice nailed to the door of the general store, written in bold letters that could be read from across the street. Town meeting, Saturday evening. All citizens encouraged to attend. Subject: the future of Mescal Valley. Garrett saw it when he rode into town for supplies. He read it twice, his face hardening. He knew what this was. It was Wade Preston making his move. Wade Preston was a man who thrived on control. 55 years old, wealthy from land speculation and trade, he held more influence in Mescal than the sheriff, the mayor, and the preacher combined. When Wade spoke, people listened, and when Wade wanted something, he usually got it. What Wade wanted was simple. He wanted the Apache gone, not killed necessarily, just removed, pushed further west, further south, anywhere that was not here. He believed the valley belonged to white settlers, that progress demanded expansion, and that the presence of natives was an obstacle to prosperity. And now, with Neshoba dead and tensions high, Wade had the perfect excuse to push his agenda. Garrett told Annaba about the meeting when he returned to the ranch. She listened, then nodded. We will go, she said. It won't be friendly. I did not expect it to be. Saturday evening arrived cool and clear. Garrett and Annaba rode into town together side by side, their silence heavy with unspoken tension. People watched as they passed, some with curiosity, some with open hostility. By the time they reached the church where the meeting was being held, a crowd had already gathered. Inside the pews were packed, ranchers and shopkeepers, families and single men, people who had lived in the valley for generations and newcomers who had arrived within the year. At the front of the church, Wade Preston stood beside a makeshift podium, his posture confident, his expression somber. Garrett and Annaba took seats near the back. Eyes followed them. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Wade raised his hands for silence. Thank you all for coming. I know these are difficult times. We've all felt the weight of recent events, the death of a young man, the uncertainty of what comes next. Tonight, we need to talk honestly about the future of this valley. He paused, letting his words settle. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm not here to demand vengeance. I'm here to ask a simple question. Can we continue to live alongside people who do not share our laws, our values, our vision for this land? Murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. Wade nodded as if he had expected this. I've lived in this valley for 20 years, he continued. I've built businesses. I've employed men. I've invested in this community. And I've done it because I believe in what we can become. But we cannot reach our potential if we are constantly looking over our shoulders, wondering when the next conflict will arise. What are you proposing, Wade? Someone called from the crowd. Wade's expression turned grave. I'm proposing we petition the territorial government to relocate the Apache band to a designated reservation, peacefully, legally, for their safety and ours." The church erupted. Some voices supported the idea. Others shouted objections. Arguments broke out across pews. Sheriff Vance stood from where he had been sitting near the front, his hands raised. "Everyone calm down," Vance called. "Let the man finish." Wade nodded his thanks. "I know this is not an easy conversation, but we have to face reality. A boy is dead. The man accused of killing him is married to the victim's sister. How long before someone decides to take justice into their own hands? How long before this valley runs red with blood because we were too afraid to make hard choices?" Garrett felt Annaba stiffen beside him. Her hands gripped the edge of the pew, her knuckles white. And then Garrett stood, every head turned. The room fell silent. Wade looked at him, surprise flickering across his face before he masked it with practiced neutrality. "Garrett, do you have something to say?" Garrett stepped into the aisle, his boots echoing on the wooden floor as he walked toward the front. He could feel every eye on him, could feel the weight of judgment pressing down like a hand on his shoulders. He reached the podium and turned to face the crowd. "I was there when Neshoba died," he said, his voice steady. "My rifle had been fired that morning. I found his body. If that makes me guilty in your eyes, then I'll stand trial and let a court decide my guilt." The words landed with force. People leaned forward. Wade's eyes widened, his mouth opening slightly. Garrett continued, "But what I won't do is stand here and let fear drive good people from their homes. Neshoba's death was a tragedy, but it doesn't justify persecution. It doesn't justify forcing families off land they've lived on for generations." The church buzzed with reaction, shouts, accusations. Sheriff Vance pushed through the crowd toward Garrett, his face flushed. "Garrett, what the hell are you doing?" Vance hissed. "What needs to be done?" Garrett replied quietly. He scanned the crowd looking for Wade Preston's reaction, and there it was. A flash of something in the older man's eyes. Not relief, not satisfaction. Fear, just for a moment, just long enough for Garrett to see it. And then it was gone, replaced by concern and shock that looked almost genuine. "This is a brave statement," Wade said, raising his voice to be heard over the tumult. "But it changes nothing. A boy is still dead, and tensions are still high. We need solutions, not more questions." Garrett met his gaze. "Then let's find solutions, together, white and Apache. Because running people out of their homes isn't justice, it's cowardice." Wade's expression went cold. But before he could respond, Annaba stood. She walked down the aisle, her movements deliberate. She kept her composure calm. She stopped beside Garrett, her presence a statement without words. "My husband speaks the truth," she said, her voice carrying through the church. "We will cooperate with the law. We will find justice for my brother. But we will not be driven from our land by fear." The crowd murmured. Some looked uncertain now, others still angry. But the dynamic had shifted. This was no longer Wade Preston's meeting. It was something else. Sheriff Vance stepped forward. "All right, meeting's over. Garrett, you'll come with me. We'll sort this out properly." Garrett nodded. He glanced at Annaba, and for the first time since they had married, he saw something other than suspicion in her eyes, questions, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. They left the church together, walking through the crowd that parted like water around stone. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, the stars bright overhead. Vance pulled Garrett aside. "What the hell was that?" "A test," Garrett said. "A test of what? Wade Preston's nerves." Vance frowned. "You think he's involved?" "I think he's afraid of something, and I want to know what." Annaba joined them. She showed no immediate reaction. "That was reckless." "Maybe," Garrett admitted, "but necessary. Why? Because if Wade is hiding something, he'll make a move now. He'll try to cover his tracks. And when he does, we'll be watching." Annaba studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "We should go home. Home. It was the first time she had called the ranch that. Garrett felt something shift in his chest. Not hope. Not yet. But space for it. They rode back through the darkness, the valley spread out around them like a sea of shadows. And somewhere in those shadows, a killer was watching, waiting, making plans. And Garrett intended to be ready when those plans came to light. The discovery came on the 9th day. Garrett had ridden out before dawn to check the northern fence line, a task that would keep him away until mid-morning. He did not tell Annaba where he was going. He had learned that she preferred to watch and deduce rather than be informed. So he simply saddled his horse and rode into the gray light of approaching sunrise, leaving her to draw her own conclusions. What he did not know was that Annaba had been waiting for exactly this. She stood at the window and watched until he disappeared over the rise. Then she moved through the house with purpose, her steps silent on the worn floorboards. She had spent 9 days observing, 9 days cataloging every corner, every shadow, every space where secrets might hide. And now, with Garrett gone, she would search in earnest. The main room yielded nothing. Furniture built for function, not concealment. Shelves holding books with cracked spines and tools that showed their age. A table scarred by years of use. Nothing hidden, nothing suspicious. The bedroom was next. Annaba entered the space that had become hers in name, but still felt like his. The bed where he had slept for years before her arrival, the chest at the foot of the frame, the small window that looked east toward the rising sun. She moved methodically, checking drawers, examining the chest's contents, running her hands along the walls, looking for hollow spaces. Nothing. She knelt beside the bed, her frustration building. If Garrett was hiding something, it would be here, close to where he slept, close to where he could check it, guard it, protect it from discovery. Her fingers traced the floorboards, feeling for irregularities. Most were tight, nailed down solid. But near the head of the bed, one board shifted slightly under her touch. Annaba's pulse quickened. She pulled her knife from her belt and wedged it into the gap, prying gently. The board lifted with a creak that sounded too loud in the quiet house. Beneath it lay a hollow space, dark and deep. And inside that space, a wooden box. Annaba lifted it, out her hand steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The box was plain unmarked, about the size of a large book. It had weight to it, substance. She set it on the floor and opened it. Inside lay a gun, not Garrett's Colt. This was smaller. A derringer with a pearl handle, delicate and deadly. The kind of weapon a woman might carry. Or a girl. Annaba picked it up, examining it. The gun had been fired recently. She could smell the faint residue of gunpowder, see the marks on the barrel that spoke of use. She set it aside and looked deeper into the box. Beneath the gun was fabric, oilcloth, wrapped around something. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a piece of torn cloth. Dark stains marked the material stains that could have been mud, but looked more like dried blood. And beneath that, another gun. This one she recognized immediately. The workmanship, the worn grip, the small notch carved into the stock. Neshoba's rifle. Annaba's hands began to shake. She lifted the weapon, turning it over, confirming what she already knew. This was her brother's gun. The rifle he had carried since their father gave it to him on his 15th birthday. The rifle that should have been buried with him or returned to Kuruk as a memorial. Instead, it was here, hidden beneath Garrett's bedroom floor. She checked the chamber. Empty now. But there were mark scuffs, evidence that it had been loaded and fired. Recently. Annaba sat back on her heels, her mind racing through possibilities. Garrett had said he did not kill Neshoba. He had claimed innocence, accepted a marriage built on investigation, allowed her into his home to search for truth. And all the while he had hidden her brother's gun beneath his floor. The evidence was damning, irrefutable. This was what she had been searching for, proof of guilt, proof that justified everything she had suspected. She should kill him now, ride out, find him on that northern fence line, and put a bullet through him before he could lie again. But something stopped her. The derringer, the torn fabric, The way the items were arranged, not hidden carelessly, but preserved, protected, as if they were not trophies, but evidence that Garrett himself was gathering. Evidence of what Annabeth heard, hoofbeats approaching, Garrett returning earlier than expected. She quickly replaced everything in the box, set it back in the hollow space, and fitted the floorboard into place. Then she stood and walked to the main room, her knife still in her hand, her decision made. She would confront him, and his answer would determine whether he lived or died. Garrett entered the house and stopped when he saw her standing in the center of the room, her knife drawn, her stance steady and unflinching. "You're back early," he said carefully, "and you're a liar." Garrett's expression did not change, but she saw his shoulders tense. "What did you find?" "You know what I found." "I need to hear you say it." Annabeth's grip tightened on the knife. "Neshoba's rifle, hidden under your bedroom floor, along with a woman's gun and fabric stained with blood. Evidence you have been concealing since the day my brother died." Garrett nodded slowly. "Yes." "You told me you did not kill him." "I didn't." "Then why do you have his rifle?" Garrett removed his hat and set it on the table. His movements were deliberate, unthreatening, but Annabeth did not lower her knife. He looked at her with an expression she could not read. Resignation, perhaps, or relief that the secret was finally out. "Because I took it from his body before anyone else arrived," Garrett said quietly. "I took it because it had been fired, and I needed to know what he had shot before he died." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "If I had shown the sheriff a fired rifle, he would have asked who Neshoba shot, and I couldn't answer without condemning Lily. The moment I said my daughter was there, they would have hanged her. So I hid it, hoping to find proof of Wade's involvement first. Proof that would show this was bigger than just two people with guns." Annabeth's breath caught. "What? Your brother didn't die in an ambush, Annabeth. He died in a confrontation. He shot someone, and then someone shot him back." "You?" "No, not me." "Then who?" Garrett was silent for a long moment. The weight of what he was about to say pressed down on him like a physical burden. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he had been holding back for months. "My daughter." The words hung in the air between them. Annabeth stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. "You don't have a daughter," she said. "I do. Lily. She's 16 years old." "Where is she?" "Hidden, safe, at Nora's house." Annabeth lowered the knife slightly, her confusion growing. "I don't understand. You never mentioned a daughter. No one in town talks about her." "Because she hasn't been here in 10 years, Garrett said. "My wife left when Lily was 6. Took her east, back to her family. I haven't seen either of them since. Until 3 months ago when Lily came back, alone." "Why did she come back?" "She said she wanted to know me, wanted to understand who her father was." His expression went cold. "I believed her. I was so grateful to have her back that I didn't ask the right questions, didn't see what was really happening." "Which was what?" "Wade Preston got to her first," Garrett said, his voice bitter. "He met her when she arrived in town, convinced her to spy for him, told her I was a dangerous man, that the Apache were a threat, that she would be helping protect the valley if she reported back to him about what I knew, what I planned." Annabeth felt the pieces beginning to shift, forming a picture she had not expected. What did Wade want to know? Land claims, water rights, information about the Apache camp's defenses. Garrett moved to the window, staring out at the desert. "Wade has been trying to push your people out for years. He thought if he could prove the Apache were preparing for war, he could get the territorial government to force relocation. And your daughter was gathering evidence for him. She was trying to help. She's 16. She didn't understand what she was being used for." Garrett's hands curled into fists. "Neshoba discovered her 3 months ago near Willow Creek. She was going through papers in my saddlebag, copying documents. He confronted her." Annabeth's stomach tightened. "What happened?" "They fought. Lily panicked. She had the Derringer, a gun Wade gave her for protection. When Neshoba grabbed for the papers, she fired. Hit him in the chest." Garrett's voice cracked slightly. "But he didn't go down. He was strong, your brother. He raised his rifle and shot back, hit Lily in the shoulder. And then I arrived. I heard the shots from half a mile away. By the time I reached them, Neshoba was on the ground bleeding out. Lily was conscious but terrified. She was crying, saying it was an accident, that she didn't mean to kill him. Annaba felt tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You chose to save her. She's my daughter, Garrett said simply. I chose to save my daughter. I put her on my horse, got her to Nora's house. Nora is a widow, lives alone. No one questions what happens in her home. She's been hiding Lily ever since, treating her wound, keeping her safe. While my brother bled to death alone, Garrett turned to face her. I went back. As soon as Lily was stable, I went back, but he was already gone. And the scene was already evidence of murder. My rifle was there. I had fired it once that morning when I was hunting a coyote that had been killing my chickens. Neshoba's body was there, blood everywhere. If I told the truth, they would have hanged Lily. A 16-year-old girl who shot in self-defense would still be seen as a murderer because she's white and he was Apache. Annaba felt tears threatening, but she held them back. So you let everyone believe you did it. It was easier for people to believe I killed him than to accept that a teenage girl had. And it bought me time to figure out what really happened, to find proof that Wade was behind it all. The handkerchief at the creek, Annaba said. The one with Nora's initials. You planted it. No, Garrett said firmly. Nora was there. She arrived just after I left with Lily. She found Neshoba's body and panicked, dropped her handkerchief in her rush to leave. I found it the next day and buried it because I thought it would protect her. I didn't realize until later that she was involved in protecting Lily, not in killing Neshoba. Annaba closed her eyes, trying to process everything. Her brother had died confronting a girl barely more than a child. That girl had shot him not out of hatred, but out of fear. And the man she had married to investigate had been protecting his daughter just as her father would have protected her. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? She asked. Because I didn't know if I could trust you. Because telling you meant putting Lily in danger. And because I knew that even if you believed me, it wouldn't change the fact that my daughter killed your brother. Annaba opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw exhaustion in the lines of his face, saw guilt in the set of his shoulders, saw a father who had made an impossible choice and was living with the consequences. Where is she now? Annaba asked. Exactly where? At Nora's house, in the cellar. It's the only place Wade hasn't thought to look. And Wade knows she's alive. I don't think so, not yet. But he's getting nervous. That confession at the town meeting was meant to force his hand, make him reveal what he knows. Annaba slipped her knife back into her belt. We need to move her. If Wade suspects she's alive, he'll search every building in town. And when he finds her, he'll kill her to protect himself. Garrett's eyes widened slightly. You believe me. I believe Neshoba would not have shot a child unless he thought she was a threat. I believe Wade Preston is capable of using anyone for his own gain. And I believe you would not have risked everything to protect a lie. Relief washed over Garrett's face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Annaba said, because if your daughter lives, she will face Apache justice. That is not negotiable. I understand. Good. Then we move tonight, after dark. We bring her here where we can protect her together. Garrett nodded. Agreed. But before they could make plans, hoofbeats thundered toward the house, multiple riders moving fast. Garrett grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Annaba joined him, peering through the glass. 6 men rode toward the ranch. At their head was Wade Preston, and they were armed. Garrett stepped onto the porch, his rifle held loose, but ready. Annaba followed, her own weapon in hand. The riders pulled up 20 feet from the house, their horses stamping and snorting. Wade sat at the center of the group, his face calm, but his eyes cold. Afternoon, Garrett, Wade called. Mrs. Sullivan? Wade, Garrett replied evenly. What brings you out here? Just following up on your confession from the other night. Sheriff Vance asked me to gather some additional information. Thought I'd ride out personally, show there's no hard feelings. That's so. It is. Wade's gaze moved past Garrett to the house, scanning the windows, the barn, the outbuildings. I was hoping to ask a few questions. Maybe take a look around, make sure everything's in order. Don't need you looking around my property, Wade. It's not a request, Garrett. It's part of the investigation. Sheriff Vance is the law, not you. Wade smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. True enough. But the sheriff is a busy man, and I'm a concerned citizen, so I'm going to look around. You can cooperate, or you can make this difficult. The men behind Wade shifted in their saddles. Hands moved toward guns. The threat was unspoken, but clear. Garrett's hands curled into fists. You're not coming into my house, Wade. Then I guess we're making this difficult. Before anyone could move, another group of riders appeared on the horizon. Apache warriors, at least a dozen, riding hard toward the ranch. At their head was Kuruk, his face grim, his rifle across his saddle. Wade's confidence faltered. What the hell? Kuruk and his warriors pulled up alongside Wade's men, creating a standoff. The two groups faced each other, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Kuruk looked at Anaba. Daughter, you are safe. I am fine, father, Anaba replied in English. Why are you here? Because word reached me that Wade Preston was riding with armed men toward your home. I will not allow my daughter to be threatened. Wade's expression darkened. No one's threatening anyone, Kuruk. This is official business. You have no authority here, Kuruk said flatly. Leave now. Wade turned his attention back to Garrett. I know you're hiding something, Sullivan, and I know it has to do with that dead Apache boy. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me where she is, or things are going to get very unpleasant. Garrett's blood ran cold. Who is your daughter? Wade said. Lily. I know she's alive. I know she killed Neshoba, and I know you've been hiding her to protect yourself. The world seemed to stop. Anaba stiffened beside Garrett. Kuruk's expression darkened. The warriors shifted hands, moving toward weapons. I don't know what you're talking about, Garrett said. Liar, Wade spat. Nora told me everything. After I reminded her that harboring a fugitive could cost her everything she's built, her store, her reputation, her safety. She made the smart choice. She came to me 2 days ago, said she couldn't keep the secret anymore. Said she's been hiding a girl in her cellar, said you brought her there the night Neshoba died, bleeding and terrified. Garrett's heart sank. Nora had been pressured into betraying them. Wade had threatened her until she broke. And now there was no more hiding. Wade continued, his voice rising. That girl is a murderer. She killed an Apache warrior to protect land theft schemes that I had nothing to do with. And you've been covering for her, letting everyone think you did it, creating this whole farce of a marriage to buy time. That's not how it happened, Garrett said. I don't care how it happened, Wade shouted. I care that a white girl is being hunted by Apaches for a crime I'm being blamed for. So you're going to tell me where she is right now, or I'm going to burn this ranch to the ground and dig through the ashes until I find her. Kuruk spoke, his voice cold as winter. If this is true, if a girl killed my son and this rancher hid her, then she belongs to Apache justice, not yours. Like hell she does, Wade shot back. She's a white girl. She'll be tried in a white court. She killed an Apache on land that borders Apache territory. Our justice applies. Your justice is savagery. She'll hang before I let you take her. The tension snapped. Men on both sides raised weapons. Horses stamped and circled. Violence hung in the air like smoke ready to ignite. And then Anaba stepped forward, placing herself between the two groups. Enough, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone stopped. All eyes turned to her. You want the girl? Anaba said to Wade. You want justice? She looked at her father. You want blood for blood. She killed my son, Kuruk said quietly. She killed my brother, Anaba corrected, and that gives me the right to speak first. Kuruk hesitated, then nodded. Speak. Anaba turned to address everyone. My brother is dead. Nothing will bring him back. Not vengeance, not trials, not blood. He is gone, and we are left with choices about how to honor his memory." "Honor," Wade scoffed. "This is about law." "No," Annaba said sharply. "This is about fear. You fear what will happen if the truth comes out. You fear losing control. But I have learned something in these past weeks. Fear makes killers of us all. It made Lily Sullivan pull a trigger. It made my brother raise his rifle. And it will make all of you into murderers if we do not stop now." She looked at her father. "Lily Sullivan is 16 years old. She was used by a man who wanted to start a war. She shot my brother because she was terrified. And yes, Neshoba died, but he also shot her. They both made choices driven by fear, and we can choose differently." "What are you saying?" Karuk asked. "I am saying that killing this girl will not bring justice. It will only create more death, more families torn apart, more hatred that lasts generations." Annaba's voice strengthened. "But there is another way." "What way?" Wade demanded. Annaba did not look at him. She kept her eyes on her father. "In the old ways, when blood was spilled, the family of the dead could demand a life. But they could also demand service. A debt to be paid over time, not in death, but in understanding." Kuruk's expression shifted. "You propose the old law." "I do. Lily Sullivan will come to our camp. She will live with us for 1 year. She will learn our ways, our language, our customs. She will work alongside our women, help with our children understand the value of the life she took. And at the end of that year, the tribe will decide her fate. Death or freedom." "That's insane," Wade said. "You can't seriously expect a white girl to live with savages for a year." Annaba's eyes flashed. "You will not speak again." Wade started to protest, but several of his own men looked uncertain. The proposal was strange, yes, but it was also merciful, more merciful than a noose or a bullet. Karuk dismounted and walked toward his daughter. He stood before her, studying her face. "This is what you want. This is what is right," Annaba said. "Neshoba would not want his death to start a war. He was reckless, yes, but he believed in peace, in finding ways to live together. Honor him by choosing the harder path." Karuk looked at Garrett. "And you, rancher, you would give your daughter to us for a year." Garrett's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to fight, to protect Lily at all costs. But he looked at Annaba and saw in her eyes something he had not expected: compassion. "Yes," Garrett said hoarsely. "If it means justice without more bloodshed, yes." Karuk was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "The council will hear this proposal. If they agree, the girl will come to our camp. She will be treated fairly but not gently. She will earn every day of her life. And at the end of 1 year, we will decide." He turned to Wade. "As for you, my daughter says you used this child to create war. If this is true, you will answer for it, not to Apache justice, but to your own law. Sheriff Vance will investigate, and if you are found guilty, you will face consequences." Wade's face went red. "You have no proof." "Then you have nothing to fear," Karuk said mildly. At that moment, Sheriff Vance rode up with 2 deputies, his face flushed from hard riding. He took in the scene and quickly dismounted. "What's going on here?" Vance demanded. "We are preventing a war," Karuk said, "and exposing a man who would start one for profit." Vance looked at Wade. "That true?" "Of course not," Wade blustered. "These people are trying to protect a murderer, a girl who killed an Apache in cold blood." "In self-defense," Garrett corrected. "After being manipulated by Wade Preston to spy on the Apache camp, after being given a gun and sent into dangerous situations by a man who wanted an excuse to drive the tribe off their land." Vance's eyes narrowed. "You have proof of this." "Lily can testify," Garrett said. "And I have documents, letters between Wade and business partners in Tucson discussing land speculation, plans that depended on the Apache being relocated." "Those are private business matters," Wade said quickly. "Then you won't mind if the sheriff reviews them," Annaba said. Wade's composure cracked. "This is ridiculous. I'm being accused by people with every reason to lie." "Then come with me." Vance said, his hand moving to his gun. "We'll sort this out at my office. Peacefully." Wade looked around at the faces surrounding him. His own men looked uncertain. Kuruk's warriors sat ready but calm. Garrett and Annaba stood united. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "Fine," Wade said through gritted teeth, "but this isn't over." "No," Vance agreed. "It's not. Let's go." Wade and his men turned and rode toward town, escorted by Vance and the deputies. The Apache warriors remained watching until they disappeared from sight. Kuruk turned back to Garrett. "Bring the girl to our camp tomorrow at sunrise. She will be treated with respect but held accountable. This is the way." "I understand," Garrett said. "Thank you." Kuruk mounted his horse, then paused. "Annaba, you have grown wise. Your brother would be proud." Annaba's eyes glistened, but she held herself steady. "Thank you, Father." The warriors rode away, leaving Garrett and Annaba alone in front of the ranch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. "I need to get Lily," Garrett said quietly. "Bring her here tonight. Prepare her for what's coming." "I will come with you," Annaba said. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." They rode together to Nora's house as twilight deepened into night. Nora answered the door, her face pale and drawn. She stepped aside without a word, letting them enter. "She's in the cellar," Nora whispered. "I'm sorry, Garrett. Wade threatened to burn my store, to ruin me. I didn't know what else to do." "I understand," Garrett said, though his voice was measured. He descended the stairs into the cellar, Annaba following. In the corner, huddled under a blanket, was a girl. Lily Sullivan looked up as they approached. She had her father's eyes, gray and clear. Her shoulder was bandaged, her face thin from weeks of hiding. When she saw Garrett, she stood shakily. "Papa," she whispered. Garrett crossed the space in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, sobbing, her small frame shaking with relief and fear. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I was scared. He said they were dangerous. He said I was helping. I'm sorry." "I know," Garrett murmured, holding her tight. "I know." Annaba stood back watching. This was not what she had expected to feel. She had imagined confronting her brother's killer with rage, with demands for justice that looked like revenge. Instead, she saw a child, terrified and manipulated, used by a man with no conscience and abandoned to consequences she could not have understood. Lily pulled back and saw Annaba for the first time. Her eyes widened. "You're his sister," Lily whispered. "Neshoba's sister." "I am," Annaba said quietly. "I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted him to let go of the papers. I didn't know the gun would actually fire. I'd never shot anyone before." Annaba stepped forward slowly. Lily shrank back, but Garrett kept his hand on her shoulder. "What is your name?" Annaba asked. Lily Sullivan." "Lily, look at me." The girl raised her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "You took my brother from me," Annaba said. "Nothing will change that. But I have chosen not to take your life in return. Instead, you will come to my people. You will live with us, learn from us. And at the end of 1 year, the tribe will decide if you have earned forgiveness." "I'll do anything," Lily said desperately. "I'll work, I'll learn. Please don't kill me." "We are not going to kill you," Annaba said, "but you will face consequences, hard ones. Are you prepared for that?" Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes." "Then we leave at sunrise." The next morning they rode to the Apache camp as the sun painted the desert in gold and copper. Lily sat behind Garrett on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against his back. Annaba rode beside them, silent and watchful. The camp emerged from the landscape like it had always been there. Low structures built from brush and hide. Cooking fires sending thin streams of smoke into the morning air. Children playing at the edges, their laughter bright and clear. Kuruk waited at the center of the camp, flanked by elders and warriors. The entire tribe had gathered to witness this moment. Garrett helped Lily dismount. She stood trembling, her eyes wide, as she took in the faces around her, some curious, some angry, all assessing. Karuk stepped forward. "This is the girl who killed Neshoba?" "Yes," Garrett said. "This is my daughter Lily." Karuk studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke in Apache, his words formal and measured. An elder translated for those who did not understand. "You have taken a life from this tribe. Our law says you must give a life in return, but my daughter has asked for mercy, so you will give us your time instead. 1 year. You will work, you will learn, you will become part of this community, and at the end we will decide if your debt is paid." Lily's voice was small but steady. "I understand. I'll do whatever you ask." "Good. You will live with the women. Learn from them. They will teach you our ways." Karuk's expression softened slightly. "If you work hard and show respect, you will be treated fairly. But if you try to run or refuse to learn, the mercy my daughter showed you will be withdrawn. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Karuk nodded to an older woman standing nearby. She stepped forward and placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, guiding her toward a group of women who waited, their faces neutral but not unkind. Garrett watched his daughter walk away, his chest tight with a dozen emotions he could not name. Fear for her safety, pride in her courage, grief at losing her again so soon after finding her. Annaba stood beside him. "She will be safe. I give you my word." "Thank you," Garrett said hoarsely. They stayed for an hour watching as Lily was introduced to the women who would teach her. Watching as she was given tasks, shown how to prepare food, how to mend clothing, how to gather water. She stumbled through it, all awkward and uncertain, but trying, always trying. Finally, Karuk approached them. "You should go now. She needs to find her place here without you watching." Garrett nodded, unable to speak. He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back, because if he looked back, he would not be able to leave. Annaba rode beside him in silence until they reached the ranch. Only then did she speak. 3 months, she said. "Our agreement was 3 months. That time ends in 2 weeks. Garrett looked at her. "I know. And then we decide what comes next." They did not speak of it again, but the question hung between them like smoke in still air. 2 weeks later, Garrett and Annaba rode into town together. It was a Saturday morning, clear and cool. They tied their horses outside the sheriff's office and went inside. Sheriff Vance looked up from his desk. "Figured you'd be coming today?" 3 months is up, Garrett said. "That it is." Vance pulled open a drawer and retrieved the marriage certificate they had signed 3 months ago. "Wade Preston's been charged with conspiracy and fraud. Turns out he was planning to sell Apache land to railroad investors before the tribe was even relocated. Had contracts drawn up and everything. He'll be going to trial in Tucson next month." "Good," Annaba said. Vance set 2 pieces of paper on the desk, divorce papers already prepared. "All you need to do is sign. Then you're free to go your separate ways." Garrett picked up a pen. He looked at Annaba. "You sure about this?" "The agreement was 3 months," she said. "We found the truth. Justice is being served. The terms are fulfilled." "Right." He signed his name on the first paper, then the second. His handwriting was the same as it had been 3 months ago, but something felt different, heavier, more final. Annaba signed next. Her signature was still small and precise, each letter formed with care. Vance countersigned and stamped both documents. "There, legally divorced. Congratulations, or condolences, whichever applies." They stood in silence for a moment. Vance cleared his throat. "Well, I've got work to do. You two can see yourselves out." They walked outside into the morning sunlight. The street was beginning to fill with weekend activity, people going about their business, their lives, continuing as if the world had not shifted beneath their feet. Garrett untied his horse. Annaba did the same. They stood on opposite sides of the hitching post, the wood and distance between them suddenly feeling significant. "So," Garrett said, "I guess this is it." "I suppose it is." He mounted his horse, turned it toward home, toward the ranch that would be his alone again, toward the life he had lived before she arrived with her suspicions and her strength, and her refusal to accept easy answers. "Annaba," he said, stopping. She looked up at him. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" She blinked, surprise flickering across her face. "What dinner? At the ranch? Not as my wife, not as part of some agreement, just as someone I'd like to know better." Annaba studied him for a long moment. "Why, because we spent 3 months investigating each other, and I realized I never actually got to know you, who you are when you're not searching for evidence or protecting your family. I'd like to know that person, if you'd let me." A small smile touched her lips. "Only if you promise never to lie to me again. I promise. And you promise to believe me when I speak instead of assuming I'm your enemy. I promise that too." Her smile widened slightly. "Then yes, I will have dinner with you, but only if you cook. I've tasted your attempts at stew. They need improvement." Garrett laughed, the sound surprising even himself. "Deal." They rode back to the ranch together, the silence between them comfortable now instead of tense. When they arrived, Garrett began preparing food while Annaba sat on the porch watching the sun move across the sky. They ate simple fare, bread, cheese, dried meat, but they talked, really talked, about childhoods and dreams, about losses and hopes, about what it meant to forgive when forgiveness seemed impossible. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of red and purple, they saddled their horses again. "Where are we going?" Annaba asked. "Willow Creek," Garrett said. "If that's all right with you." She nodded. "It's all right." They rode through the twilight, the desert alive with the sounds of evening. Crickets, distant coyotes, the whisper of wind through sage. When they reached the creek, they dismounted and stood at the water's edge. Annaba knelt and placed a bundle of dried flowers on the ground, flowers she had picked that morning tied with red thread. She spoke softly in Apache words Garrett did not understand but felt in his chest. Then she stood, and they stood together in silence, not touching, not speaking, just two people honoring the memory of a boy who had died too young, caught in circumstances beyond his control. "He would have liked you," Annaba said finally. "Nashoba. He always respected people who spoke plainly, who did not hide behind false words." "I wish I could have met him properly," Garrett said. "Under different circumstances." "Me too." They mounted their horses and began the ride back. Above them, stars emerged one by one, filling the sky with ancient light. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, indifferent to human drama, patient with human grief. When they reached the ranch, Annaba did not immediately ride toward the Apache camp. She sat on her horse, looking at the house, the barn, the fences that marked the boundaries of Garrett's world. "I should go," she said. "My father will wonder where I am." "You could stay," Garrett said, "in the guest room or the porch, wherever you're comfortable." "Why? Because I like your company, and because I'm hoping this dinner won't be the last time we talk." Annaba smiled. "It won't be. I'll come back, tomorrow perhaps. We can ride to see Lily, check on her progress." "I'd like that." "Good. Then I will see you tomorrow, Garrett Sullivan." "See you tomorrow, Annaba." She rode into the darkness, her silhouette fading until she was just another shadow among many. Garrett stood watching until he could no longer distinguish her from the night. Then he went inside, lit a lamp, and sat at the table. For the first time in 3 months, he felt something close to peace. 1 year later, Willow Creek still flowed between two worlds, but it no longer divided them. Lily Sullivan knelt beside an Apache woman named Tallulah, learning to weave patterns into a basket. Her hands were calloused, now her skin browned by sun. She spoke Apache with a heavy accent but growing confidence. When the children ran past laughing, she smiled and called out greetings. They returned without hesitation. She was not Apache. She would never be Apache. But she was no longer an outsider either. She was something in between, a bridge perhaps. A reminder that people could change, could grow, could earn forgiveness through dedication and time. At the edge of the camp, Sheriff Tom Vance sat talking with Amala, the younger sister of Annaba. They spoke in low voices, their heads close together, their expressions soft in ways they never showed anyone else. A courtship was developing, slow, careful, but real. And near the center of the camp, Kuruk stood watching his daughters, Annaba and Imala, both strong, both finding their own paths. He thought of Neshoba and felt the familiar ache of loss, but beneath it was something else now, acceptance. His son's death had brought pain, but it had also brought change, understanding, a future where perhaps his people and the settlers could find ways to coexist. It was not the future he had imagined, but it was better than war. Garrett and Annaba rode into camp together as they did most days now. They were not married again, not officially, but they were together in ways that mattered more than paper and ceremony. They dismounted and walked toward Lily. She looked up and smiled, her face lighting with genuine happiness. "Papa, Annaba, how are you today?" Garrett asked. "Good. Tallulah is teaching me the star pattern. It's complicated, but I'm getting it." "You're doing well," Tallulah said in English. "Better than many who try." Lily beamed at the praise. She stood and hugged her father, then hesitantly Annaba. Annaba stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed and returned the embrace. "You have grown strong," she said quietly. "I'm trying to be worthy of the second chance you gave me." "You are." Later, as the sun began to set, the tribe gathered for a council meeting. The elders sat in a circle, Kuruk at their head. Lily knelt before them, her hands folded, her head bowed. Kuruk spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. An elder translated. "1 year ago, you came to us carrying the weight of blood debt. You had taken a life from this tribe. Our law demanded payment. You have worked. You have learned. You have shown respect and humility. The time has come to decide your fate." He paused, letting the words settle. "The council has spoken, and we have decided that your debt is paid. You are free to return to your father, free to live your life. But you will always be welcome here. You have earned a place among us." Lily's shoulders shook with silent tears. She whispered thanks that were barely audible. Garrett felt his own eyes burning. Annaba's hand found his squeezing gently. The council dispersed. Families returned to their evening routines. Lily would stay one more night, then return to the ranch with Garrett in the morning. As darkness fell, Garrett and Annaba walked to Willow Creek one final time. The water reflected starlight, flowing eternal and patient. "What happens now?" Garrett asked. "Now we live," Annaba said simply. "We build, we teach others that peace is possible, that forgiveness is not weakness." Together, she looked at him, her eyes reflecting the stars above. Yes, together. They stood at the water's edge, two people from different worlds who had found common ground in the space between. The creek flowed around their feet, carrying old griefs downstream, leaving room for something new, something that looked like hope. And above them, the stars bore witness to promises made not in words but in choices. To stay, to try, to believe that love could grow even in the hardest soil. The desert wind carried their silence across the valley, where it mixed with laughter from the Apache camp and the distant sound of a hymn from the church in town. Two worlds, one creek. And finally, after so much blood and sorrow, the possibility of peace. The end.